You are listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I'm your host, Professor Ace, and with the support of the University of Alaska Fairbanks Department of Social Work, we gather voices of revolutionary social workers from around the world, organizers, healers, artists, and educators, people who carry stories that connect us, challenge us, and remind us what it means to be human. Each episode is an offering, a chance to slow down, listen deeply, feel the ground beneath your feet. Come as you are, stay as long as you need, and remember, no matter your pain, somebody, somewhere feels the same. Welcome to The Circle. Episode 79 features Relando Thompkins-Jones, a social worker and social justice educator. He helps organizations close the gap between stated values and lived experience, centering cultural humility and intersectional equity so communities can thrive, not just survive. If you find something meaningful here, the best way that you can support this work is simple. Like, comment, share the episode, and subscribe to our channels. And if you want to connect, ask questions, or be a part of the conversation, please reach out, because I'd love to hear from you. Welcome to another episode of The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I'm your host, Professor Ace, and I'm very happy to be joined all the way from Michigan by Relando Thompkins-Jones. How you doing this afternoon for you?
You know, I'm doing okay. I was just talking to a friend of mine earlier this morning, and I said this several times, but it's like, you know, you look at the news and the headlines, and you realize in many ways, you know, it feels that the world is on fire. And so one of the things that's helpful for me during those times is to remember myself as being part of a longer history and continuum of folks who have used what they had where they were or gathered in community or in solidarity with other people to work for a better society, a better world. And so, I think history is being written all the time, moment to moment. And the ways that we utilize ourselves and spend our time is really important and really critical. And so I really appreciate even this moment in time to be able to sit with you and meet you and talk to you, knowing, you know, a lot of the great critical work that you stand for. And so I see it as, hey, I'm meeting another, you know, a fellow justice worker here. And it's a good way to spend my time, good way to spend the afternoon, regardless what is happening around us. And then also, you know, in addition to, because of, in spite of what is happening around us. And so, really happy to be here. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy life as well to join us. And there's a lot that I think we can unpack. We can get into some current events and talk about the state of the world. But something that you said stood out to me is you know, these relationships that we build through these conversations. And this is episode like almost 80 or something for this podcast. I do another one with my wife. We're around like 20 something. So like 100 plus episodes, and it can get overwhelming at times. You know, I think I saw also you're the host, writer, producer, all of that for your podcast as well. And it's a lot of work. But the beautiful thing about it, especially the more that I've gone on, is the relationships that I've been able to build and knowing that there's other people out there working to make the world a better place. And so I just think that's a very beautiful thing. And so thank you for the work that you do and you know, being able to unite and maybe push the conversation a little bit further, you know, through this dialogue. So thank you.
That's right. Honored to be here.
Yeah. Well, you're the host of a podcast too, right? Well, let's see, what is it called? Is it the Social Justice Origin Stories?
Yeah, so I host two podcasts actually. One is called Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian, which preceded Social Justice Origin Stories, but mostly talking about here today is Social Justice Origin Stories here on and I appreciate you sharing the YouTube link. But it's been an idea that's been in my mind for several years. And really happy that this year and the year before have really been able to gain some traction in making the vision that I had a reality, where it's something that's living and breathing and available for people to interact with. But I can say more as we go on. But Social Justice Origin Stories. It started with a podcast that I have called Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian, which may or may not get into, but really happy that it's something that is living and breathing and existing. Many thanks and much credit to the stories of the folks who've shared their stories with me. They gave it life in many ways by being themselves and sharing their stories. And so, yeah, I encourage you all to check it out and look forward to talking about it more.
Yeah, and if those of you that are listening after this is posted online later on, it'll be in the link will be in the description. But I think that one of the commonalities that we have among many is the idea of storytelling within our, it's in both of the titles of our podcast, right? Storytelling. And I'm reading a book about the American Indian Wars in the West in the 1800s. And there's this part where I think his name is General Miles approaches a sitting bull of the Lakota, and he tells him all this stuff about him that's negative, kind of. And Sitting Bull says, "Well, that's your story. That's not our story." And I think that's a kind of epitomizes how important storytelling is, because even if you look at history, right, it's just his story. It's whatever was written down. And sometimes we are too quick to take that as the truth instead of realizing that, hey, there's a lot more versions of this story or different versions or whatnot. You know what I mean? So why do you think storytelling is so important?
I often tell people that I found my voice in social work education and social work classrooms. So I grew up, born and raised Detroit, Michigan, the west side of Detroit, Brightmoor community of Detroit. And I had a lot of experiences in particular with the at the intersections of race and class, where while at home I was getting a lot of positive affirmation. You know, hey, you're intelligent, you're brilliant, you're smart, you're caring, you can do all these things. The external messaging I received is a lot of anti-Black messages, a lot of anti-Black messages, a lot of anti-poor messaging. I often talk to people about this when I was in when I was in high school. Used to run track, used to run long distance, and I would travel. I would run a route in my neighborhood. So there's this particular intersection that I have in mind. And the further I would run away from my neighborhood, or further I would run this one particular road, further I would get further away from my home at the time, I would see the landscape start to change. So it's like the houses would start to get bigger, you know, more manicured lawns and things. There's you know, I it was later on where I'd learned about you know, language around like health disparities and things like food deserts and things like that.
Mhm.
Some people even would say food apartheid now. But just realizing that the resources were different the further I would travel away from my home, and I'm just running long distance. So I'm running distances away, but then I would have to turn back. So there was something that started to mess with me and have me have all kind of questions where I would notice the landscape change. And then since I didn't live there where I ended up, I would have to turn back and I would see the landscape change again. And I would notice it was racialized. I would notice it was, you know, just differences in resources and things like that. And so I would hear messaging around, and you're a social work professor. So, I mean, there's lots of history around the trope of like the welfare queen and folks who need
Mhm.
Who are in need of different forms of assistance, you know, being lazy and things like that. So hearing a lot of those narratives around laziness, around unworthiness, anti-Blackness wrapped up in there, but then also contrasting that with, well, hey, my lived experience, I'm seeing people, you know, hardworking folks in my neighborhood, you know, some folks, they come back and it's like they change out of one uniform to go to the next, you know, job to, you know, sometimes not even seeing folks very often because of the working and the heart. And so wait a minute, it's like I'm seeing hardworking folks all the time. I'm seeing folks who, you know, are not criminals as we were are said to be in many instances. And like, what's the contradiction there? So always having that question. And so I get to a I'm fast forwarding here, but I get to a class on race relations in the United States, and I have a professor who breaks down like the history of redlining for me, and explaining how law and policy and design went into shaping the ways that you know, neighborhoods were designed. And so it's not like an accident, you know, in terms of disparities of wealth and variety of different things. That really unlocked a lot of things for me. It brushed away a lot of the overwhelming, really anti-Black, anti-poor messaging that I was receiving. And I knew that wasn't true for myself, but I'm like, why is this so pervasive? So having somebody really sit down and use education as a way to support me, and I'm sure others in class too, but in really understanding lived experiences that we may have had that we hadn't had the language for, but we knew, so that was sort of where I developed this care and passion for education. It's like, no, I have this feeling like I know this stuff I'm being told about myself and about, people in my community is not true. I know it's not true, but the popular pervasive messaging is this thing. What's up with that? And so, having a professor, which, even an affirmation to you, I'm sure in many ways, there may be even in your teaching, those moments where through education, it can be a liberatory experience for the folks who you may be and supporting through your education, your teaching in that. And so I think storytelling is so important because, like you said, his story in that. I think story in particular and the power to tell story and the power to shape it plays such an incredible role in how we understand not just who we are, but then also how we understand like what's possible as well. Grad school, I started to learn intergroup dialogue facilitation for folks who are techniques in intergroup dialogue facilitation. And for folks who may or may not be familiar with that, it's like face to face or sustained, folks are doing it online now, but sustained communication among people who might have, one or more social identities that have a history of estrangement and conflict. And so one of the things that was really illuminating for me, a concept that I continue to carry with me, is this concept when I was early learning it at the time, is this concept of cultural hegemony. It's like there are these dominant messages that explain how our, world society came to be, and power plays a huge role in shaping not only who gets to decide that, but what the methods and modes of disseminating that communication, those messages are, how broad and widespread it can be, and how folks are rewarded or punished for accepting those dominant narratives. So like white supremacy is a part of that. I would say meritocracy is a great part, is a part of that as well. Messaging around if you just work hard enough and you play by a particular set of rules, the expectation is that you'll be able to move about society in a particular way. But then not only calling back to my own lived experiences of seeing and early on, like, no, folks are working real hard here, but we're still in this place socioeconomically. What's going on with that? So this idea that that storytelling and combining that with some power can be used to in some ways explain away inequity that exists in society, and it's being used to say there aren't any differences here, all the rules are the same, while at the same time denying the reality and the lived experiences of folks who don't experience the fullness of that. So yeah, I think storytelling is so important and so critical because even with those dominant narratives that I'm thinking of and some of the things that I described from my earlier experience, there have always been people who in their own, just by existing and living their lives, countered that. I remember seeing a clip, it was either on YouTube or some other social media account, but it was a clip of Nicole Hannah-Jones saying like, particularly in regards to the teaching of Black history, in that instance, it's like, hey, we are inconvenient just by our how do you explain, where the socioeconomic foundations and building of America. How do you explain these people over here in all these stories that sort of romanticize and paint colonization in this very like heroic way? And so I think storytelling is very powerful in that it can shape, yeah, really just our understanding of reality. But in particular, I think, like I said, like people have always resisted, people are resisting even now. And so I think it's important to share, counter narratives to those dominant narratives as well as a way to not only own that reality that folks have always resisted and, and are currently resisting, but also to chip away at the myth, at the myths that are told that we are often expected. Some folks, are tested on certain things. I'm a father too, so I'm thinking about, class and history and things, kids coming home, different things. It's like, well, you're talking about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and folks in particular ways. It's like, well, that's not like, and sometimes like I would share even in my my own teaching quotes from Lincoln or Jefferson or others that it would be surprising to some of the students who find themselves, in my classroom. Because it's like, well, hey, I hadn't been told this before. And so storytelling plays a very important role in shaping what we believe to be true and possible and real. And I think it's really important to establish some counter narratives too, as a form of resistance, but then also as a liberatory exercise too, as well, liberatory practice.
Yeah, I think that to be honest with you, I view education as, I mean, my kind of education, anyways, the way I see it, as a liberatory practice, and that's what it should be
For
about.
sure.
Is uh, is liberation. You make me think of a while back. I taught when I was teaching this adjunct. I taught sociology 101, and I had this old guy in my class, and he was a little bit had some racist ideas, not like totally full of vitriol, but like some racist ideas. You know what I mean? And we watched in the class. I had them watch the old TV show The Wire. We were talking about it, and in one of the seasons, I think season 4, it's about the kids in the school system, and we were having a talking circle afterwards, and he had remarked that um, he's like, "Wow, like those kids, I really liked them, and he made I can't remember exactly what he said, but he made some offhand racist comment about how like why aren't other black kids like that? And I was like, well, have you, even though it's a fictional story, have you ever considered that the reason that you like those kids is because you got to know them and you heard their story, and perhaps if you got to know the other ones, they wouldn't just be this caricature or this idea that you have about them." And so I think,
Hmm.
it is important for us to have storytelling. I mean, real stories and fiction can be
Yeah.
valuable too, because it shows us the human and the nuance and the diversity behind, individuals. And I think that in my experience as a professor and elsewhere, who's often worked with black people, black community, is that it is maybe along with native communities, native folks, it's the one, I don't know how you want to say it, category or group of people that like people kind of run the other direction and are sometimes, not everybody, but a lot of people are unwilling to really look a little deeper and to hear, because I think it's because it challenges their ideas that they'd been ingrained with, growing up and
Hmm.
so on. And that can be hard to do for folks. And so, big respect to folks that are willing to look in the mirror, challenge themselves, but it's hard, you know what I'm saying? And
Hmm.
so the more and more that we're able to do that, to share stories, the more and more that folks have the opportunity to push back those false narratives or those false ideas that they've been ingrained with sometimes throughout their entire life.
Hmm.
And I also like that you were talking about, facilitating dialogue. A long time ago, I had this huge privilege, this huge opportunity to participate. It's called the Rural Human Services Program up in Alaska. And it was with all Alaskan Native women. Sometimes there were men involved, but for the most part, it was Alaskan Native women. And at first, I was like, I hate this. I can't stand this. I'm sitting in this big circle with like 40 people. I listen to everybody share. I'm like, wow, you guys are taking forever. And I'm hungry. I got things to do. Then there was a shift that happened in me that, you know, it's one of the things that I'm the most thankful for in my life, the experiences that I've ever had, because I started to listen to them and I started to realize that, hey, you may have a little bit of a different story than me that I couldn't relate to yesterday. But the more I listen to you, the more I realize that it's just your story and my story. It's our story. And I was able to situate myself there. And now, 10 plus years later, I utilize the talking circles in my own classes, and it's the most beautiful thing I've ever done. If I've ever done anything that's positive in the world, it's integrating the talking circles into my classes. And sometimes I have online asynchronous classes, and students just come voluntarily. Like right now, I host them every Thursday at noon. Students come voluntarily, and they're the most beautiful thing in the world. I very rarely had a disagreement or an argument in there. Folks really take the time to listen to each other, um, and grow and unite together. And so just that idea of dialogue and being able to have a space to share yourself. I think some students come and they don't think they have anything to share or value. And then they find out that they do, that they come with a lot of experience and wisdom and knowledge. And being able to share that, have other people listen to you. And then, the beauty of a talking circle as well is, it goes in a circle. So we always want our first reaction in this modern world. You watch like something even like ESPN, and all they do is arguing these days. They got people on there with,
Hmm.
they can be entertaining, right? But they often lack substance. And what they're saying is to try to get more argument because that's what gets the views. But in a
That's right.
talking circle, even if you want to disagree, right then, you got to wait till it comes back to you. And by the time it comes back to you, you may have listened even more. And, something changed in your mind or something changes in your heart. And especially over time, one circle is one thing, but when you participate over time, it can really change and revolutionize the way that people think about themselves, think about other
Hmm.
people. So I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit more about the dialogue that you mentioned earlier and what that entails.
Yeah, dialogue is so powerful. It's so transformative, and it has a way of, at least for me, it had a way of supporting me and expanding my scope. So, I've had folks in my life that would say things like, and maybe you've heard this quote or similar things to it, but like, the truth may set you free, but before it does that, it'll make you angry. And so, I would describe a lot of my undergrad experience, I would say this awakening, in particular, awakening coming into an awakening of all the ways I had been lied to around my marginalized identities. And so, and I'll just say a note here too when I say marginalized. So when, and everybody might think of that in particular ways, but as me, the speaker, sharing my own story here, like when I say marginalization, I don't mean it in the sense that there is something marginal or negative or wrong about those identities. What I am saying when I say that is it's an acknowledgement that there is something that has happened and is happening, regardless of how I feel about myself personally, regardless how folks who may even share the, certain ideas I have, like feel about ourselves personally, that is still impacting our trajectory, that is still impacting the way in which we experience the world and move about society. So I'll just say that as sometimes, being in the community, language is really important, and also we can have different understandings of what that means. I did that quick detour there because I, personally feel like in the sort of the coaching and self help kind of realms, perhaps some of it is well intended, but I am also macro in my focus too, and I do feel like sometimes this tendency to sort of individualize things that are systemic, I think that can be harmful personally. And so all for, yes, having a particular mindset and believing in oneself. And then also I am for acknowledging the realities that, even if we are confident and competent in who we are and understanding that, we still interact in and move and are impacted by systems that create these disparities and barriers within our experience. And so it's an attempt at holding both of those things at once. But I'll just say it's just my own personal commentary here. I just think a lot of it is well intended. And for folks for whom that is the fuel that propels them forward, more power to you. But I do think there's something that's lost in individualizing, oh, don't let particular things make you feel a certain way. It's like, well, you know what? I know who I am. Like, I know I'm intelligent. I know I'm brilliant. I know I can do all these things in these spaces, and white supremacy, classic, like all these different things are present in the environment, virtual and physical, that can have an impact on that. But yeah, I would say, so I just wanted to do that detour there for folks who are listening. Yeah, when I say marginalized, I know I'm not saying that's an implication on our identities that experience, discrimination individually, systemically, institutionally. I'm saying there are things that are happening that create that. Not that we feel that way about ourselves. Although in the education process, sometimes, and I say too, if you're listening, forgive yourself for that as well. Being inundated with messages over and over and over again and not internalizing that, these systems are very much designed in ways to create that outcome. So if you have internalized that, and that's part of social justice origin stories too as well, is like, what is your journey of your relationship with resisting that, or who are the people, experiences that sort of that not sort of but that reminded you, or that um, helps you to realize that you've been lied to, and what are you doing with that information? How are you resisting every day in ways that are large or small? So with that being said, yeah, a lot of my experience in undergrad, it was really around like getting rooted and grounded in the ways that I have been lied to for race and other marginalized identities I hold, and such anger. I even go back on these, I would go back in certain like reunions and stuff, and seeing other classmates, and they would say like, hey, Rolando, like I can still remember this time in class where you just shut this thing down. This student said something talking from some place of privilege and you just were not having it. So there's a part of my life and my experience where I was very angry, and was just not having any conversation that propelled forward the dominant messages around inferiority, racial inferiority, other aspects of identity. But I would say undergrad for me, it's primarily that. Grad school, actually, I'm thinking about this in regards to what you were sharing, your example with the circles and how you felt initially. Grad school, I got into grad school and started learning about intergroup dialogue, facilitation, and wow, I got to say, there's a couple of things about intergroup dialogue facilitation that were very transformative for me. So one, we were taught to have dialogue as opposed to debate. So it's really not, okay, you're sharing something with me and I'm waiting, like sort of what you said, like, and I'm actually looking for something that you're saying right now. And I'm looking for some sort of weakness to say, but you didn't bring this part up, or oh, you forgot about this. And here's why I'm right. It wasn't that kind of, we're listening to others, and we're also sharing our own experiences with others, to seek understanding. Understanding doesn't necessarily mean agreement, but like understanding of like what your context is and what has brought you into this, to this place in terms of your worldview, um, for mine and others. But so there's that, and then also the fuel, the vehicle that we used was our personal experience, and so that was a shift that I hadn't experienced before either. It was like prior to that, it's like I got really academic. Hey, lots of experiences early on trying to communicate and share those stories of marginalization, and being met with things like, oh, well, maybe you were just having a bad day, or are you sure that was happening? Are you sure? And so I got really academic. I got really like, well, hey, might not listen to me, but you won't, here's this data or these statistics and things that you can't deny. And I'm just owning that, just being in that place developmentally at that time. Now, while I will say that that form of communication, it has its purpose, is important in many ways for where I was at that time, and then also for what was required of the kind of communication that we were trying to foster. That wasn't the place. It was like, no, don't bring in other things. Just use your lived experience. And so that was the vehicle. Even if you bring up something you read in some article or something, okay, so how does that tie back to your lived experience, or what your relationship with privilege or with oppression is to that? What does that mean for you or your lived experience? And I mean, even in terms of social work, like how you're applying that to your practice in that. But then also, I had experiences just being in dialogue, listening to other folks, and learning about the ways that I was very privileged in some ways too. So learning about things that I had been taken for granted, socialization around gender and so many other things. And so it really humbled me in terms of it opened my scope, because I realized, as angry as I was and still am, although it functions in a different way now, there were folks who might direct a similar sort of anger at me from a different vantage point, in terms of something that I had some access that they didn't. I have some level of privilege that they do not experience. And it really caused me to really open up my scope and say, oh, wait a minute. All right, I need to do some deeper learning here. And that's where actually Notes from an Aspiring Humanitarian came from. The premise of that is I feel like, there are things that we lose when we participate in or when we support oppressive practices. And so the aspiring humanitarian was really about a journey of trying to learn ways to learn and unlearn, learn ways to become more humane, is what I write in the premise of it, is more humane to not just myself in terms of unlearning some of the internalized oppression, but then also more humane to others, and realizing, what is it that I'm missing out on? I'm really moved by James Baldwin, that quote, to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all of the time. I could definitely say I had that rage. And he would talk about, like, it's not just rage at what happens to us, but it's also the rage at the ignorance or criminal indifference on the part of white people to care, to do something about it, to change. And the all of that resonates. But the thing that really, really, really jumped out to me is when he said, like, so the work is to channel that rage so that it doesn't destroy you, And so I've incorporated that into my own teaching philosophy as well, as an instructor, where through education, increasing our awareness, how are we then, channeling the legitimate rage that we have about the inequities that exist in society, the inequities that we experience personally, and then also how are we using this time together to increase our awareness of the ways that we are ignorant and criminally indifferent to the plight of others in ways that we don't experience. And so it's sort of a multi dimensional approach using education, but dialogue has been a powerful vehicle for that. And I mean, being in spaces with people, cognitive dissonance, right? So, like, being in spaces with people as they experience the contradiction, as they, wrestle with, I like to say that I am a good person and I am also benefiting from or participating in something, realizing it that could be harmful to, or that is harmful to other people, or this person is, my family member. And I know they love me as an individual, but they act or vote in ways that are harmful to people in groups that I also care about and that are also within their communities as well, whether they know it or not. And so how are we coming to grips with these contradictions that we live in? And what's our journey of, bringing about some alignment between our stated values and the outcomes of the actions that we take? So yeah, dialogue's been a huge vehicle in that. Fortunately, myself and my colleague, we've been co-teaching this intergroup dialogue course since 2013. And we're just sort of going through the memories and the numbers. I mean, hundreds of students at this point, all gone on doing great things, still using some of the skills. And in many ways, it's like a full circle thing. I really feel honored and thankful to be a part of that in ways that dialogue was really transformative for me. And yeah, it's been great. And social work students in particular. So yeah, I say I'm not a neutral educator. I don't think, and that's another thing too with dialogue too, as opposed to some other forms of communication that I experienced prior, is like it doesn't assume that we're coming into a circle or communication. We're coming into the room with the same level of knowledge, experience, but then also impact and what's being talked about. And so I hear a lot of different programs. And, my belief is that everyone is doing the best that they can. That helps to keep me going. And also, some things just resonate more with others, with some folks than it does with others. But I hear a lot of things around like civility now and civil discourse and that sort of thing. And I've have participated in some experiences there. If we're having a conversation or trying to have a dialogue and the power analysis isn't there, the acknowledgement isn't there, it really depends on what kind of outcome we're looking for. But yeah, that was one of the things that was really transformative too, and that dialogue acknowledged those power dynamics, all the way up to from the facilitators to the folks who are participating. We all have identities and experiences within those. We've all been socialized in a particular way. And sometimes that socialization is going to show up right here in the room, right here in this group, in ways that support those dominant narratives. And then, what's the importance of counter narratives there? Where are the learning opportunities there as well? So yeah, lots to share there. But yeah, dialogue has been a really transformative experience for me personally. But then I've also seen that in education. I've also seen that in broader social work practice too.
Yeah, and I liked a lot of what you said, but I liked what you said about it coming full circle. And, it benefits us as well. That it's a privilege to be able to facilitate and participate in those things. From my perspective, it's not like I have to do them. I get to do them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that, you talked about cognitive dissonance, and it makes me reflect on myself. And, well, I think I've always tried to do, like you said, the best that I can. There's definitely been moments, and I'm sure there still are moments where I experience cognitive dissonance, or I'm not seeing things the way that maybe I should or I could.
Mm-hmm.
And I shared this with I'm leading the practicum seminar this semester, and we were talking about bias and thinking of times when we became disillusioned with something that we believed in or thought was true and took for granted that it might not be. And a key moment for me was actually, you mentioned James Baldwin. He played a role in that too, because so many videos and books and short essays and things like that I've read, even Go Tell It on the Mountain, taught me a lot about things. But there was a particular time in that era where somebody gave me the autobiography of Malcolm X. And I read it, and it's a great book just on its own, just to read. It's very interesting and engaging story. But I read it, and then I'm looking him up, and I'm watching all these videos, because Malcolm X was like somebody I knew who he was, but he was really fringe for me at that time. I really didn't know much about who he was or what he did or what he said or what he was for or anything like that. And he kept talking about like the blue-eyed white liberal or the blue-eyed white devils and things like that. And I'd say, well, it's a good thing he's not talking about me. And the more that time went on and the more I continued to reflect on it, I realized, you know what, he is talking about me in the sense, especially in the sense that I'm taking for granted that I'm right in all these things and that I know and that I'm just the good, I'm the friend of the black people and all of this stuff. And I wanted to be a friend and I wanted to be good, but I took for granted that I could be wrong, if that makes sense. So I had to take a real
Mm-hmm.
look in the mirror and I said, you know what? At least in part, he is talking about me. And I've got to own that and understand also why he might feel and think that way and why others might feel and think that way still today. And it really, really helped me. And it was hard, it was like, breaking something deep inside of me. Like, really? He's talking about I'm that guy. But I think that the more opportunities we have for dialogue, and even like reading Malcolm X and seeing his videos is a sort of dialogue for me because he's talking, looking at it, talking to me, and I have to think about it, and I'm kind of reflecting back the ideas, and I can't talk to him in real time. There's enough out there between, what in the autobiography to all the videos and speeches that he has that I can kind of have a dialogue, and it really helped push me through. And another thing that I think Malcolm X epitomizes is the capacity for change. He's not the same person at the end of his autobiography as he was in the beginning, or when he was in jail, or when he was first in the Nation of Islam and all of that stuff. He changed time
Mm-hmm.
and time again, and it just shows that it's a real demonstration, a real life demonstration of, or evidence, I guess you might say, that change is possible, and that gives me hope for other people to change. And I think when I think about my change in those talking circles and that dialogue with Malcolm X and many other areas, it wasn't like snap my finger, like somebody said something to me and I just
That's
took
right.
it, if that makes sense.
That's
And I
right.
think,
That's right.
yeah, I think we fall into that sometimes, like, this aha, gotcha moment. You could even go watch like Charlie Kirk videos, for example. I really didn't know much about him, and then it happened, and started watching. I was like, well, what is he talking about, and what are people saying to him? And I think one of the errors that both he makes and the people talking to him oftentimes is they think that, okay, I'm going to present this fact, or even a perceived fact, and that somebody's just going to go boom, and I'm going to change. But change is hard, and it's nuanced, and it takes time. And so the more opportunities that we can have to hear stories, but also to dialogue and things like that, that's where we create the capacity. And I think even when you're talking about those students you worked with 10 plus years ago, imagine the seeds that were planted in those dialogues. And it may not have, some of them may have been present pretty soon after or immediately, but a lot of them might be coming to fruition and growing years down the road. And I love when I get an email from an old student or something that's like, hey, remember when we talked about that? I'm
Mm-hmm.
glad we did because I look at it different now. And so I just want to say thanks. And that's the best that we can do, right? I can't, there's a reggae artist and kind of a revolutionary philosopher from Jamaica. Her name's Janine Cunningham. She goes by John Nine. And she says, you can't just tell them. You can't just tell them and change. You've got to show them. You've got to lead and you've got to set by example. And I've kind of tried to live by that and realize that, hey, when I get somebody in the circle that maybe I disagree with, I try not to be like, this is the facts and you got to change. Instead,
Mm-hmm.
having the opportunity to hear everybody's stories, sharing my own and my own ideas. And then over time, just like me, they might change a little bit. And it may not be today and it may not be tomorrow, but it may be the next day or somewhere down the road, if you know what I mean. And I think that that's
Mm-hmm.
what it's all about. So I really appreciated you sharing, your experience and your ideas around dialogue because it's just so important. Thank you very much for the work that
Yeah.
you're doing.
Absolutely. I had a social studies teacher when I was in high school, James O'Leary, who would often tell us repetition is the key to learning. And there's particular things that go into curriculums and all that. I mean, I didn't recognize significance of it until much later, but he was putting us on historians like John Henrik Clark. He was putting us on like a lot of different people at an early age, but he will also say repetition is the key to learning is one of those things where at the time it was just kind of like this, oh, okay, all right, all right. But that makes a lot of sense, particularly I think for a lot of things, like, as I get older and I think about how some of my elders would say, oh, you understand when you get older. And now I'm in this phase of like, yeah, I understand now what y'all are trying to. So just life in general, there are some things, but then also particularly when it relates to, our own journeys of of learning and resistance and about social justice and different aspects. It's like sometimes it's not going to happen that first time. And so as an instructor, as a facilitator, working with groups and things, like I understand that and expect that. There's another friend, I'll just say this real quick. Another friend of mine who, when I first started posting things online, I came across his work, higher education professional consultant now, Dr. Keith Edwards. But he wrote this whole article about education being an act of faith, and talked about, from his experience, just realizing from his experience also, um, having experiences where things were brought to his attention. But then also as an educator, it's like rarely do, when things come up like that challenge our worldview, the people say, "Oh, thank you so much for telling me that, professor." Like, "Hey, thank you, professor, for putting me on this thing. I really appreciate it. I'd never heard that before. Thank you so much." Sometimes it's met with resistance. Sometimes it's met with, "Why are you teaching this?" Sometimes people will go as far as, I mean, I ask students this as well, to think about how it can show up, the resistance and the dissonance, the rejection of that dissonance can show up individually within ourselves, but then also how can it show up societally as well, like in broader institutions too. Sometimes it can show up as far as, folks going, the entire books and topics, being banned from talking about because of what it brings up within us, what it requires of us to sit with and understand, right? But at an individual level, it happens too. So that's one of the things I'm thinking about. Is like he would say, like, rarely do people say thank you when we're met with that. It's often, hearing it over and over again. I'm paraphrasing, but it's often hearing it over and over again. And sometimes, which is real interesting with education, but it's a part of the thing. Sometimes by the time it kind of clicks in, the person who initially put us on to the message will be long gone, and I'm not necessarily long gone in terms of like, my not living or anything like that, but like long gone, folks have traveled, they moved, their careers, their lives have brought them in different places. Like 20, 30 years ago, this person told me this and now I'm getting it, or however long it takes for people. And so it's just something to keep in mind. I appreciate you sharing that point too. But yeah, it's a part of I see it as a part of the role. And it also reduces, at least for me, it does. It reduces this feeling of like, you know, hey, you're going to be the one to do the thing. It's like you're playing a particular role at this time in this person's overall experience. And do the very best that you can. Be as honest as you can, right? And just know that role for what it is. But yeah, sometimes, I mean, even think about your own experience. I know I'm thinking about mine. Like sometimes when things are brought it to me, like, "Oh, what do you mean like, what are you talking about male privilege? What are you talking about? Like I did X, Y, or Z, or here are all the ways that sometimes people go, here are all the things that I have done, which in the affirmative, which do not negate like whatever is happening currently. Right. And so, yeah, it's a part of the experience. Yeah, that's an important part. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. I just want to say what's up to David. David, it don't matter if you come in late. I appreciate you whenever you come. And he just was offering an example. He says it was when it was in the talking circles that you have conducted that helped me realize I needed to write that letter to my mom about my childhood in order to heal. And what he's talking about
Mm,
is we got into talking about letting things go, and we found a few of us, I think 3 or 4 of us had issues with our parents growing up and things like that, and that we were holding on to those problems, and a couple of us shared ways that we've let go of those things, and both of me and David wrote a letter to our mothers, and the best thing it did is it helped us let it go and to move on. So that's just one example there. And
mhm.
see if that we have some people in the chat. So I know you got something to say. It's awful quiet. So if you have any questions, make sure you check in with us and let us know what's on your mind. I was thinking about the idea of marginalization and in social work specifically. And social work, obviously, like if you're to read whatever it is, the code of ethics or wherever you're reading, they're going to be, the language is going to deter from that. And, we want to be inclusive and things like that. But I think I always like to start with, history, social work history 101, essentially. And almost always it starts with the same group of white women like Jane Addams and this and that. And I get that that's where the modern day profession of social work started to some degree. But from my perspective, folks have been doing social work from the beginning of time, and often they weren't, white women. They were a lot of different kinds of folks,
Mhm.
indigenous folks, black folks, all kinds of people doing
Mhm.
social work. And then if you look at like a textbook, and I get there's a lot of diversity in textbooks and what we have, but often it does the very thing that we're against. It marginalizes it. So we'll start like again with History 101. We'll start with Jane Addams and the other women, And then, yeah, we'll talk about Black folks, but it will be maybe not literally. And sometimes it might literally be in the margin, but it's literally kind of marginalized on the side. You know what I'm saying? So I think that I feel a duty as a social work professor to change that narrative. So I never start with that. You know
That's
what I'm
right.
saying? I start
That's right.
somewhere else and bring in other stories. And there's no way to be inclusive of everybody that's ever done social work in the world, but we can find and present certain stories. And there's plenty of like autobiographies and stuff out there, and people that talking in their own words and stories in that sense. And so I was wondering what you thought about that. Like, how can we, in social work education and social work in general, how can we get away from that? Because it seems like even though we're
Man,
trying to get away from it and we say we are, we're still stuck in the precedent of that,
man.
in that Jane Addams thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I get weary sometimes when I think about it. It's like one of those things. I get real tired when I think about it. I know there are folks who may disagree with what I'm sharing and thinking, but I also think there are folks that it resonates with too. So like I'll say I've appreciated. There was another episode I saw of you a while back of your and I know you have two of them, so I'm trying to make sure I might mess it up whether it was this one or your other one. When you said, there's all kind of different ways. I'm paraphrasing, but it's like what I'm getting from what you said. There's all kind of different ways of doing social work, and I think you brought up in this one particular example, and I was just wearing it too. Do I have it with me? I went to pick up my my daughter the other day, and I was wearing my I don't know if y'all can see it, but my people's free food program, Black Panther party shirt. And I think there's one particular episode I saw you, and you were talking about like the food programs, the breakfast program, and all these things. And like that's social work too. And when I say I get weary is because and weary and frustrated is because I think currently, as it's currently designed, the social work profession, and in some ways, yes, it is diversifying in that, but it still props up and puts up barriers to full participation. Maybe that's language that fellow social work folks may understand. To full participation in the field and in the profession. And I'm implicating things like the licensing process, things like the licensing exams, research that had been held on to for quite some time, but until fair recently, revealing severe racial disparities in pass rates for the licensing exams. I'm going all the way up to I'm thinking equity, I'm thinking full participation. I'm going all the way up to field placements that are not paid for students. I'm thinking about how I made it work back then when I was getting my field placement and stuff. Hours upon hours upon hours of working in different places because that time was not compensated in that. And I think um, when we consider the equity issues that we are that we say that we're about, and the folks that we say we're about supporting, I think that in particular is a huge barrier. I will say a license does not, and this is, I mean, I'm just speaking, but I just think a license in and of itself does not, and an exam in and of itself does not speak to one's competence and make any sort of predictive indicators about how they will be as a practitioner. I have supported and trained social workers in clinical settings with licenses, in particular, doing some real work around better understanding the impact of white supremacy on how that shows up in therapy and in sessions in that. And the same kind of resistance that can sometimes happen, from a student participating is still experienced among our peers in that. And so, but licensed folks still able to, go out and do and practice all, work in different places. And so I feel like that's a real barrier. I know there may be, in terms of some folks who are listening, some disagreement around that. And I'm fully aware, talking about not cognitive, but talking about counter narratives, that there are a lot of folks out there doing work in spite of, I'll say, the licensing process, in spite of some of the barriers that are currently in place. And so yeah. That question, starting with the history and that one example, you didn't say it this particular episode, but I did see that episode where you brought up the programs, some of the programs in Black Panther Party in particular.
Mhm.
But there's all sorts of ways that social work is practiced. I think especially now in this time of erasure, in this time of um, institutional retrenchment, right? Like speaking of stories, right? There's been a story that has been told about whiteness for many years now. When conditions are equitable, when folks have opportunities to participate fully and be their full selves and whatever supports they need to be able to participate in society, organizationally, academically, what have you, that story of whiteness being supreme does not hold up. And so, talking about cognitive dissonance, I think what we are seeing is, in a very large macro institutional way, is this wanting to go back to that story, like the story we're told we are supreme and we are the best and we are, and again, when conditions are equitable, when other folks are able to be a part of society and show themselves and their intellect and their gifts, and that white supremacy myth does not hold up in any shape or form. And so I believe the cognitive dissonance, the inability to sit with the fact that whiteness is not superior, is so great, to where there's this huge, and any folks out there who understand critical race theory too, like this huge attempt at retrenchment and at restoring an equilibrium in ways that not only do I want to go, and I don't want to go to this, but I'm just saying sort of what the messaging is intended to say is, like, not only do I buy into this myth of white supremacy, but I am going to use all the levers within multiple systems, healthcare, education, media, a variety of different things, to reflect that mythological worldview. So that has meant, the hundreds of thousands of Black women, and many of the articles say, have left the workforce, but I'll say have been pushed out of the workforce. Multiple folks of color in leadership positions across government being fired without cause. Lots of anxiety around the ways that, again, when conditions are equitable, when there are certain social gains that happen that facilitate fuller, not because we are not there yet, but facilitate, a glimpse of more complete participation of a variety of different groups. It's like, well, wait a minute, no, that challenges the myth. And so I believe on a macro level, like, storytelling is important on an individual level, but I believe the larger story, the dominant narrative of white supremacy, is being challenged to such a degree to where, similar to a person might be resistant in a classroom, or, oh, I'm not going to watch that movie, or I'm not going to have this conversation with that person. I think it's being reflected at a very much at an institutional level. No, we don't want this to, attacks on museums, take these exhibits out. Anything that chips away at the story of America being told in a particular, heroic, romantic way. Yet we're still here. History, all these things, those contradictions still exist. And so, reflecting that back on social work, I'm saying all this stuff about social work and the barriers because I just really feel like in many ways, we don't have time to continue to allow these barriers to remain. I do feel encouraged that there are folks in different states who have been, on the topic of licensing and the exam in particular, who have been, bringing some challenges to that, who have been proposing some alternatives around that. Folks who have been doing stuff for years in the field already, who have acknowledged things that, and again, I'm saying, I know there might be some folks who disagree, but folks who have said, things around, like, I'm sitting here, there's the classes that I'm taking, there's the field experience that I'm getting, and then when I'm sitting down and I'm taking the exam, the logic, the things to get to A to B to C, I'm just paraphrasing, but none of what is constructed here is what I would actually experience or reflective of the things that I've practiced or encountered to this point. So again, history of Jane Addams, I think we must also be critical of that, right? Like, even in that time, in that work, who else was there, right? Like, what else was going on concurrently? And then also, what are some of the ways, like, societally, historically, that social work has been used to support different institutional injustices as well. So I love that this is was a critical social work podcast, right? encouraging people to ask those questions. But yeah, I will just say that I just think with the rolling back of the intended erasure of the majority of the civil rights gains that folks have literally lost their lives for, institutions that have in my estimation, preemptively capitulated before the challenge, had even begun. Some of this stuff that was coming out was not law. It's just like, guidance. Here's what we think. But institutions who have then preemptively began to roll back certain things. And so I would just say that's why I get weary. I just feel like there's lots going on. What I love about social work, or what got me into social work, is it helped me understand systems better. It helped me understand how power can be used as a tool of oppression, but also how power can be used as a tool for good. And so at the heart of all that I am saying here, in the recognition that there have been folks doing this stuff before it even had a name of social work and are currently doing stuff, even if they might not be recognized with that particular title, I just think is too urgent right now to have some of these barriers up. And when I'm thinking about full participation, like what genius, what interventions, what awareness, what ingenuity, what strategy are we missing out on by literally blocking through policy the full participation of folks who are most impacted by the issues, who have their own ideas and solutions around, like, or ideas about like what solutions could be. So yeah, I think it's a really important question. Just honestly, admittedly, I do get very weary at the weight around it. And then I also, just the ways that, sometimes even our students too begin to practice the things that they are taught and how they are responded to, institutionally, for doing what they are taught to do when it comes to advocacy around, like, it could be things like paid field placement, or it could be things like, there's lots of forms of support and advocacy. So yeah, I appreciate the question. I just will say that it's in my estimation, it's been past time for these barriers to continue to exist. Yeah, it goes back to earlier thinking around storytelling and narrative. Who gets to decide what competency is? Because like I said earlier, I'm telling you, and it is no, critique necessarily around, in some ways, the ability, the competency of folks in particular areas. But if you can't talk about oppression in your practice, if you haven't investigated what your relationship is to that and how that shows up, it's just a lot of, yeah. And that's just in the clinical piece too. But I also have my own views around social work, as I also understood it, has roots in the macro space as well. And I think there needs to be more support in supporting students who want to go that route. Not everybody wants to do the clinical practice and therapy. And for those who do, yes, let's continue those areas of support. But when it comes to opportunities, even for licensing licensing macro social workers, well, maybe, perhaps some folks will have to let me know what their experiences are. But I will say, as a student, it's sort of a way of finding my way around that, because those opportunities weren't easily available in my experience. So yeah, it's time for some changes.
They're not readily available. I think that's one of the number one things that I hear from students is this, and myself, my own experience as well, is you have more macro ideas and you get into, especially when you get to the MSW level, but even at BSW, it becomes this over professionalization of social work where you're kind of either funneled into clinical social work or case management type of things, when other people have other ideas, and I think become somewhat disappointed and a little disillusioned with social work once they get into it by how limited it is. But I also think there's a couple things I wanted to mention, like that over professionalization of social work also contributes to those, like that wall being up that kind of you were alluding to with where we're at, where we need to break them down, is that sometimes we don't have like we're so incapacitated with all the things that we have to do. You go through a BSW, you go through 4 years of your education, you got to do a practicum, you probably got a job, you might have a family on the side, then you go to your MSW. Let's say you might do the 2 years where you got to do 2 more years of practicum, where you do advanced standing, and you got 5 graduate classes a semester, which you're supposed to be spending like 10 hours a week in there, plus an internship, plus you got your job, plus again, like family or anything else. If you, God forbid, if you get sick or something like that, you don't have time to deal with those things. And then you graduate, and many social workers take out student loans and whatnot to graduate. So you get out and you start getting anxious because you got to pay back your student loans, and you got to figure out how to pay for your licensing fees. You got to study for them, all that kind of stuff. So then you look and you're like, oh, Indeed has this job for, I can make $100,000 a year, but I got to see like 50 clients a week. So then you're even more busy and overcapacitated. And if you're seeing that many clients, then you for sure don't have time. If you're doing it, I don't think you can even do that the right way. But if you are, you definitely don't have time to worry about social justice or about
Mm-hmm.
evolving your consciousness or elevating yourself in some way like that. And so a part of that is the system that we've set up doesn't allow we might say it in the language that we use, but then we don't
Mm-hmm.
provide any actual space or opportunity to do it. And even like talking circles, sometimes they're supported, but oftentimes it's looked at as like, this isn't efficient. You don't have, you know what I'm saying? Like this doesn't fit within the competencies or something like that. And when I'm thinking
But
about
see,
it,
I
I'm
would.
like, this. I was
Go
just
ahead.
say I was going to say that from my perspective, it's the most important thing that I
Yeah.
do. And you can go
Yeah.
online and find out the information I could curate for you for a class, but you can't go online and curate a talking circle where you hear real lived stories and experiences and have that opportunity to share yourself. But yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in relation to that, I'm thinking of my intergroup dialogue course, and that would be one of the points of feedback. Is like, I will often get students who are getting ready to graduate, and it's like, oh, I really wish this would be more of a main part of the curriculum. I really wish I would have gotten to this place sooner. Some students say things like, I've learned more here than, I've learned in, however large chunk of time, when it comes to that practical application of really learning, but then also like, how does that influence how the actions and the decisions that you make? Calling the circles, and it's just a point of questioning and reflection, but calling the circles inefficient, or some of the things that develop those connections and that reflection time in those ways inefficient. I would really question that, because what happens is sometimes those quick decisions or those things are happening, particularly for in the clinical space, but in other spaces too, where it's definitely having an impact on the folks that you're sitting with. It definitely is. And again, like, and also, there's some folks too come to this place of, I have to be sort of a blank slate, and can't say or do things one way or another. But for folks who are experiencing some of the worst of what this society has to dish out, it is so critical and important that you have a relationship with yourself and continue your own learning around how you fit into all that, how the profession fits into all that. Because if we can't have those conversations about, privilege and oppression, how are we really able to support someone experiencing those things, or responding in a way that might be, deemed as the right way to, the right way to respond, but it's right according to the design of, when it was initially constructed and formed. It did not consider, folks with different identities in it. So yeah, I hear that, and I've experienced that too. Oh, this is not efficient. What are we doing? And this kind of thing. But it's like, okay, well, the folks that you come into contact with every day, they hear it loud and clear, whether or not, we are reflecting on those things or not. It shows up in our actions and our decision making. It shows up in the notes that we take, who's questioning or who's combative. It shows up in who's resisting and who's, just has some, it shows up in how we even describe, our experiences that have a way of impacting, folks in their trajectory. So I hear that, and it's still so important to do that work, because I think it informs so much of the other things that happen. That's what I'll say. I think it informs so much of that if we're not in that conversation. But I also just acknowledge too, yeah, that's a design problem to me. That's a design problem, to where we have organized the work in such a way to where we have to do all these things to make the money, or we have, the loans, all that stuff is a design problem that that needs to be solved for sure. And even within that, I'll say like social work, I feel like can play a real important role in doing that. But we got to stay critical, which is why I appreciate the name of this. Like we got to stay critical. We can't just like, because the speed and the amount of things that are coming at us, it can be easy to sort of make those decisions that perpetuate the status quo. We gotta pause where we can. We gotta be critical in all those places where we can, to slow that process down a little bit more. Because it's in that slowing down that we actually, I feel, are able to recognize where the real interventions need to be. We're actually able to listen to the people that we serve more. We're actually able to craft or shape policy that is actually helpful to people. So yeah, I hear that, and I've experienced that too. I appreciate you bringing that point up and naming the reality of it. Yeah, however possible.
I, I think
Yeah.
you mentioned too, we got to be able to listen to folks, and we do a really bad job of that collectively. I think in social work, like we look at education as something we deliver to them instead of co-create with them, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. I believe in
Yeah.
the co-creation. I don't even believe in coming with the syllabus and this is the law. I believe in maybe having an outline and a potential path, but I like to get to know my students. Every group of students is different. I'm different every semester. New information is
Mm-hmm.
out and new stuff is there. So if it's just all preordained, then how much do we miss in that, and how much are we unable to listen to the folks that we're actually educating? And that could go to social work, like the people we're working with as well. Are we listening to them? Are we allowing them to, that's what we're supposed to do, is allow people to co-create their treatment, right? They should also be able to co-create their education because everybody is different. But I feel like we do a really, really poor job at that sometimes within
Yeah,
social work.
poor job, terrible job. A part of social work education, I believe, should, and maybe some people are doing this, but should really explicitly focus on as well, like what sort of methods of feedback are there. Or how are we? What's our relationship with getting and receiving feedback from people? Because I think in the professionalization of it, and arguments around like title protection and all that, I think while in some ways, I think yes, respect and recognition and those sorts of things are important. I think it literally trains people to put on a certain type of armor to where we are not willing to hear that, oh wait, I have my license, but I just told you what you just said was like was so harmful to me or my experience or my community as a student in this classroom. What you just said, like I've literally had experience. Yeah, I have stories myself of things that were said by faculty members that and done by faculty members that yep, you've got the doctorate, yes, you have, in some instances you have the license, yes, and what you're doing right now in this current moment is harmful, and not being open to feedback about that is harmful. So that power dynamic is there, and so that's another aspect of dialogue as well, which is counter to a lot of ways education is traditionally taught. It's like this reality that we are teachers and learners. Like when you're sharing your story, I get to hear from you some things you have to learn. I'm learning from you when I'm sharing mine. You get to learn from me. But we acknowledge when we go into this space, classroom, or done this with organizations too, but acknowledging that we've all been socialized in different ways. And so because of that, even the folks who are facilitating may say or do things that are reflective of that socialization. And we need everybody in here so that we can have more of a clear picture of what's actually happening. And so yeah, we have some work to do, but feedback and being able to accept that feedback is important for sure. For sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I hear the arguments and the stuff around title protection and licensing and having some sorts of processes to prove and to do certain things. And I also, like so many things, I feel like when you understand history, or at least as I'm understanding history, there's a lot of stuff that was put in place again to prevent access to full participation, whether that was intentionally done or whether that is a byproduct of something that was intended to be an intervention in some other way. Like for me, it gets into some of the Ibram Kendi stuff, but for me, it's like the outcome. What is the outcome of it? What's that? What are we actually seeing on the other side of this intervention that we're trying to do? And whatever that result is what we should call it. Is what we should call it. And if we want to call it something else, then we have to start thinking about what else we can do to change what the outcome is. Yeah, racism is expensive. Is the sort of underlying or the overarching thing. It's definitely expensive for that foundationally. It's definitely expensive for people of color, but then it's also expensive for white people too. Again, like what's lost? Whole ideas, whole avenues for intervention, whole brilliance and genius and all these things that are still kept on the outside because of some of these processes that we have in place. Am I saying no process should be in place? No, but what I'm saying is like, what is the process that's currently in place? We see that it's not working, or we see that it is working, but it's not working for everybody. So if we're interested in it working for everybody, I say support those people and groups out there who are pushing for change to open this process up, because it's too much stuff going on. And it's a lot of us out here who are macro minded and clinical minded in a lot of different areas, and would probably have been in those places much sooner had it not been for some of these barriers. So, and I also think of the folks who may not end up there, who the profession is folks might move on and do something else, something different. So, yeah.
I think you brought up a really good point, which I wish that more white people would consider, is that what you lose when you eliminate everything else. And it would definitely have eliminated a lot of the beauty that I found in my life, if that makes sense. And so I think, there, obviously we're in a divided place right now in the country. And I don't think that, any side is absolutely right and any side is absolutely wrong by any means. But I think there's a lot of evidence that shows a lot of what you were talking about with Donald Trump and being the president. And I think just a couple examples I want to bring up is when you talk about white supremacy and things like that, is the undoing of things. And I think you mentioned like museums and things like that. But he's oddly interested in, or maybe his administration, I don't know how much it's him himself or other people altogether, I have no idea. But he's oddly interested in like taking away things that are indigenous or black and things like that, and replacing them, or maybe something that, like, good example would be there's the tallest mountain in Alaska was called Mount McKinley forever, but the original native name is Mount Denali, and so they had officially changed it back. I think maybe during the Obama years, I can't remember exactly when it happened, but they changed it to Mount Denali, and he's made this big old deal to change it back to Mount McKinley. But why? President McKinley didn't have anything to do with Alaska. It makes no sense other than he's a white guy. And then I think other examples would be, you remember Standing Rock, how big of a deal that was when everybody was, there was I don't know how many people, there were so many people rallying. It was one of the biggest like movements of my life, I think, especially in my adult life, of how many people were there and following that and supporting that. And I remember watching a clip of Trump, and he was I don't know, in his office, in the Oval Office. And he's like, yeah, just put together the pipeline, whatever. I can't remember the name of the pipeline. Was it the Keystone Pipeline or the other one? Anyways, he's like, I just put together, signed. He shows his signature, signed it off. And he's like, can you believe it? Nobody even called to complain about it. Nobody was against it at all. And I'm like, well, what do you mean nobody was against it? Because I just watched Democracy Now! And saw thousands upon thousands of people over there. So are you saying that the native people are nobody? Or are you saying like the people that are against you are nobody? I'm confused. And I think that's just one of, or a couple of many different examples, like, replacing different statues and this and that, or whatever. But there's definitely a really concerted effort to make America more white again. And sometimes it's subtle and sometimes it's right in front of our faces and stuff like that. And again, like you said, I wonder what we lose in that sense when we're taking those things away. Fortunately, I think that the universe is tilted in a different direction. The earth, the world, whatever it is, it's tilted. The general consciousness, like Martin Luther King, it's aligning towards justice at this point. It's shifting towards justice. And so it's going to take some more time, but as often as I am discouraged by what I hear and see in the world, I'm very often encouraged as well by what I hear from people and the work that they're doing, and putting different ideas forward. And I think, I don't even remember who told me this, but I had a conversation recently and we were talking about history.
Yeah.
Why didn't we have more people fighting on behalf or against slavery? Or why didn't we have more of this? And obviously I wish we had more. I'm not saying we had enough. What I'm saying is that maybe we don't tell those stories enough. Maybe if we didn't center Thomas Jefferson and centered more, somebody an abolitionist, whether that's John Brown or whoever, somebody that was doing something different, then maybe we would know those stories, but we don't tell those. We don't center those stories. We put them out to the side, and you have to look really hard to find them. And so maybe if those were the stories that we told and those were the stories we valued, then those would be the stories that we push forward into a new world. And many of us are doing that, like you. And and countless other folks that are just putting themselves out there and doing everything they can to change the world. And I think that that's what it's all about. And it's shifting to some degree. And I think to some extent, these things we're talking about with the current administration and all that is blowback for it already shifting. And so
Yeah.
there's a sense
Yeah.
of insecurity. And so there's a sense of urgency to like hold on to that. And so that tells me that once that's pushed, and I think I'm not a big follower on mainstream news these days. I try to avoid it to some extent, not to stay uninformed, but to just stay outside of the status quo, if that makes sense. And
Makes sense to
I
me.
think that folks are, not everybody, but I think there are folks that are turning against that kind of stuff with the Jeffrey Epstein stuff and things like that. And I think that you may see some real stuff go down in the next little while, because I don't think that you can stop the tide of the change that's coming on, if that makes sense. And so
Hmm.
I think that there are things to look forward to, and that doesn't mean we need to stop. It means we need to ramp up things and continue these dialogues and continue doing things differently. We're running out of time. I got to get going, but there was something else that I was thinking about too. Is you have on your bio, it says that you build more equitable and inclusive communities by lessening the distance between who they say they are and how those words are felt by the people in those communities. And it had me thinking about, I think you mentioned earlier about performative or so. I don't know if you use those words, but sometimes I see in this modern day is that you'll get something um, and it'll become performative. Like we'll put it in our syllabus, like a land acknowledgement or something, and we'll put it in a
Yeah.
syllabus, or it's required to say here. And obviously, the fact that we're doing those things are positive to a sense, but not without the thought behind them and the reflection behind them. And you're doing it because not because it's supposed to be in the syllabus or whatever, or wherever, or in your, your company mission, or the corporation's mission or something like that, but because you truly believe it and you thought about it and you reflected on it and you feel like feel and believe that it's the right thing to do. And so I guess it's a double-sided question. If you could talk more about that part that I read in your bio about, lessening that distance. And then also, the idea of it being less performative and being more meaningful and real, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So lessening the distance, that comes from me internalizing and incorporating into my work before Dr. King was killed. It was the very last, when he was talking about the mountaintop, the very last time he talked about, like, all we say to America is be true to what you say on paper. And as a macro social worker, this is actually a part of what I apply, or how I apply myself and utilize myself when I'm working with organizations or groups, right? So all we say is, to America is be true to what you say on paper. There's stuff written down about what it's supposed to mean to be able to fully, and I keep saying it, but fully participate and experience society. Yet at that time, King is talking about the glaring contradictions that exist. Yeah, it's written down over here, but not everybody is able to experience that. And we can see it reflected in every institution in society that people interact with. And so when I say I build more equitable, inclusive communities, I use education. Dialogue is a big part of that, but I use education as a way to lessen that gap. It could be those dialogues, those instances of having facilitated dialogue and having folks learn from one another. It could also be in the forms of getting feedback around folks, from folks within organizations about how they're experiencing their organization, or how they're experiencing the impact of some service or intervention that an organization is providing for folks in community. So it's like, here's who we're saying that we are, here's what we say we want to do, but then actually talking to people who get to interact and interface, or who experience the impacts of that. And is that actually meeting what they're saying? And then if not, how can we change that? How can we get closer to that point? So using dialogue as a way to do that. But again, being accepting of feedback, being open to recognizing our capacity. Of course, we may have great intentions, but also being open to recognizing our capacity as, we have the capacity to perpetuate inequity too. In many ways, that will change by being open to feedback around our actions and how that's. But we got to be open. If we get defensive and say, "Oh, you don't, you know what we're doing for this community, or all these years of doing X, Y, and Z," or we have this benefit or that benefit as an organization, or sometimes folks, "Oh, I always have an open door policy. Anybody can talk it," but we can say things, but if our actions in terms of how they're experienced by the people that we say we want to show up for, if they do not experience it in that way, then we have some changes that we need to make. And we can make those changes in one way by listening to those experiences and incorporating them and taking it personal, not in taking it personal to the point of like centering ourselves as leaders and folks who are trying to create change in that, but taking it personal to, okay, this is telling me something really important about the design decisions that I'm making, if we're talking about from a policy sort of level, or this is taking it personal in terms of like, oh, my leadership here or my teaching or my whatever it might be is having this particular impact for these groups that I say that I am wanting to be in solidarity with. I say that, but what I am doing or how they are experiencing me does not reflect that to them. And it is their experiences that we need to be centering. Then here's what I need to be doing. Here's some changes that I need to make. So there's that. And then also in terms of the performative piece, honestly, being open to feedback is a part of that. So like again, if we're hearing something that says what we were doing didn't land in the way that we wanted it to land, being open to making changes there. But then I'll also say stay consistent. So I think about, companies like Target and other places, all the money that was promised after George Floyd's murder from various institutions and corporations, and recognizing that not only was that not truly fulfilled, like only a sort of fraction of those dollars were actually dedicated to different causes, but a lot of the programs, initiatives have been rolled away or disbanded. Entire departments, and if we want to talk about higher education, entire departments at institutions, entire cultural centers being disbanded and ended. And so, how do we make it, not performative? It's like, well, being consistent. And so, in saying in times where it's sort of broadly supportive that Black Lives Matter, or that we're supportive of all these other things, when there's sort of some degree of institutional or national awareness of that is one thing. But when that is absent, what we do during those times is what really, in my, in this particular moment, answering this question is one of the things that comes to mind for making sure it's not performative or not. And sadly, for so many of us, out there doing this work, have seen and experienced that a lot of it has been performative. And that's something that can be disillusioning and disheartening in the moment. When we look at the longer arc of history, I think it's something that can be informative. So in some ways, it's like, oh, that's not surprising, actually, because there have been these different points of progress in history that have been met with backlash and retrenchment, and we are in one of those right now. I'm not saying that makes people feel better, but just acknowledging it can be disappointing in the moment, and at least it might help understand things in the longer scope of things, the further we look back and recognize that, yeah, we've had a lot of instances where folks have said things and done promises, made promises only not to fulfill them. And so what helps it be less performative is remaining consistent. And so I think to folks, even in social work education, I have colleagues at different institutions where they can't say things like white privilege, or they're being told they can't say things like white supremacy or toxic masculinity or different can't. So it's sort of hard as a profession that is the story of it, right? It is built and designed from this place of advocacy and equity and justice. And when we backpedal and when we take steps to sort of do that, so we can sort of navigate and survive or what have you. I think one of the things that we've seen institutionally is like there's no amount of capitulation really that will satisfy authoritarians. So yeah, the way that we keep it being being performative is to remain consistent. And that's another Martin Luther King thing, and I'll just say that and pause. But some quote around like, and I'm paraphrasing it, but y'all go look it up. But this is quote around like, we learn a lot about ourselves, not only not during those times of comfort, but in times of like, conflict and adversity and challenge. Like those are the moments that we really learn what we're made of. I am sad to say that for many institutions, we are finding out that, some folks aren't made of a whole lot when it comes to this. And I'll say, similarly as always been the case throughout different times of history, people are resisting and people have resisted and people are currently resisting. So in some ways, take comfort in that. And social justice origin stories for folks who are out there is just one way. I know you mentioned being caught up in the sometimes things move so fast we don't have that time for reflection. But it can be one way for you through listening to the story of another to not just listen to what they're saying, but also think about your own story and where are you? Who are some of those people and moments in your life that got you to this place of awareness and understanding of an advocacy or whatever the area it might be, right? Talking to a variety of different people to show that help is happening in a variety of different places. And so it's our work, I think, is really to find those places where we feel like we can serve best. And so, yeah, taking some time out of your day, whether you sitting down to, or whether you're watching it in video or listening to it, um, or reading transcripts or what have you, but like really being in a relationship with, through listening to the story of another, what sort of inspiration can you find in this moment for what it is you can do where you are with what you have, given the conditions that are around you. There's always something we can do. And so that's just a moment there. But yeah, it's also just a statement. Like people have always been resisting. I keep saying that. But I hope too, for folks who check that out and listen, that you're reminded that again, help is happening in a lot of different places and you're connected to that. You're a part, even though that might not be your episode, you might not be the person that I'm talking to in that particular moment. You are connected to the people who are participated in this project. And I want you to think about what your origin stories are too, and then how you also, in what you're doing, can may in some way be influencing the origin stories of other people too. So like you said, it's a lot happening, but it's also some things we can find some encouragement about. And for me, storytelling has been that thing that has emerged as a place where my skill set and passion meets with, a real solid sense of purpose and agency. I think stories are the things, move people. And so I'm happy to be able to have one piece of that work to try to share with other folks too.
Yeah, that was beautifully said. Well, I want to thank you, Rolando, for your time, for your wisdom, for your experience, for your energy, and just for the leading from the heart is what I would call it, leading from the heart and sharing that with your students and with the world. I thought we had a beautiful conversation today, and I'm sure that we'll speak again. I'm really backed up on producing podcasts right now. I've been over my head, if that makes sense. And
Oh, that I understand. I have a back
I,
catalog as well. Yep, yep. Mhm.
yeah, I'll most likely get this up with some shorter clips over the Christmas holiday. Might be a
Okay.
little bit sooner, but it's probably realistic for me to say that. And yeah, I just want to say again, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Much respect to you for everything that you're doing, for especially, leading with the dialogue and all of that. You're
Mhm.
doing great work. And like I said, we'll reconnect again. And if you ever need anything from me at all, or you ever want to collaborate on anything, please reach out. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity for any last words before we close out.
Yeah, there's room enough for all of us in this work of trying to make the world, our society, our neighborhood, whatever level you're operating in, there's room enough for you. So if you've got a intervention or if you've got a project or a program or something that you've been having on the shelf that you've been kind of thinking, I don't know if that'll resonate with people, or I don't know. If you've been feeling unprepared for it in any particular way, I'm just here to share like the world needs what it is that you have to offer, what is on your heart to share, whatever intervention, whatever thing it is. Like it's something that's needed. And I encourage you to take some action steps, however large or small, to move yourself closer to bringing that thing to a reality. So I'll say that. I also thank you again for having me. uh, it's really nice to meet you too. And yeah, another person out there doing the work. I think I've heard something about you completing your doctoral program. It's something that I'm also thinking over for myself as well. So I'm very encouraged by some episodes. I think I've heard you just allude and talk to about that, your own experience a little bit. So I wish you the best in that as you continue to complete it. And yeah, there's room enough for everybody, y'all. It was really an honor to be able to be here with you and share the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope if all things go well, this May I'll be finished, and that's a pretty big accomplishment for me. Although, in some ways, like you said, I don't think that getting the letters by your name really proves anything, but it does open some doors and some opportunities for us. And so I think you'd be great. So if I can ever help or give you any lend my experience to help you get started or get going, I'd be happy to. So let's talk again, my friend. I got to
All
get
right.
going, but thank you so much. It's been a
Thank
pleasure,
you.
and we'll talk soon. Peace,
Thank you. It's been an
Rolando.
honor.
Bye bye.
Thank you.